second. There he goes.
Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host for the Patriotic Populist. And with me is my co-host, Herschell Miller. How you doing, Herschell?
Well, Nevin, I'm doing good. Feels good to be back in the saddle after all these weeks off.
Oh, yeah. It feels good to be back in the saddle myself. I mean, just an update. Our apologies for not being on this program for at least a month or a month and a half. However, just been going through some personal challenges, and that has worked out. For those of you who may not know, I'm in a rather involved romantic relationship with a woman that I truly, truly love, and our relationship is really strengthened. Her name is Yelady Delgado. She's an amazing woman. So if you're watching this program, honey, I love you so much. And it's a real pleasure to be in your life, and looking forward to new adventures in the future. Now, on top of that, I also have had COVID too as well. Yes, even though I was vaccinated, I caught a very mild version of COVID. So no, I'm no longer contagious. I've been resting up. I've been watching movies. I've been listening to music. The past week, I got started into exercising. And part of this show, we're going to be talking about the challenge of the COVID pandemic, which I feel is a attack of biological warfare by Communist China. We'll go into that in a little bit. So, but I've been weathering a lot of challenges, and a lot of things are doing relatively well in my life, and I'm very thankful to God, my family, to you lady, and my friends.
Yeah. Well, Nevin, it's been, I've hated not being able to do the show, but I think we're all thankful that, you've gotten to a point again where you feel comfortable doing the show, and that, you don't have to worry about everything else, because, that's something, on my part of it, and I can't make any excuses. I haven't been doing near enough shows that that I haven't been doing shows on my part that I wanted to do. And, a lot of it is, me and Nevin, we don't make any money off of this. We're not filthy rich politicians or political pundits. We do this in the time that we have. I have a job. I've spent the last 2 weeks in Mississippi, and I'll go down there again next week. But I am thankful to the followers of this page that have stuck with us this long. So many of you from so many different walks of life. I mean, we're over 400 subscribers now. We're closing in on 400 likes on Facebook. I mean, it brings me a lot of hope seeing that even in our absence, we've gained a bunch of followers, and I can't thank y'all enough for that.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I know, Herschell, you had a couple of Facebook live streams of the Herschell Miller Show. I definitely urge people to check out the Patriotic Populist Facebook page, to like it and comment when appropriate. Herschell has done some really good recordings with some friends and guests of the show, like Lloyd Ogden, for example. And I was actually following and commenting on the show's programs too as well. So I urge you guys, fans of the program, to check it out, to like the Patriotic Populist Facebook page. So yeah, so we're back in the saddle. We're going to be continuing the show on a semi-regular basis. I'm going to be out of town from Wednesday until Saturday, and doing some traveling, picking up my daughter at camp. But I'm not going to be doing too much heavy traveling after that, out-of-state traveling, because of the rampant COVID pandemic, especially in Florida and other states. So what do we have on the menu for tonight? Well, speaking of menu, but first, tonight, instead of coffee, because I'm coffeeed out, I have a nice Pinot Noir red wine. I figured let's enjoy this show in style.
Yeah.
What do you have tonight?
Yeah. See, so I am drinking a Bud Light Clamato tonight because I've always liked them, but here recently I have really found a taste for them. And as hot as it is in this fucking shed tonight, I needed a beer.
Hey, you deserve it, man. You deserve that cold beer. So tell us what that beer tastes like.
So I actually started drinking Clamatos before they were an actual like product. So what old timers used to do is that you would take a beer, like a tall boy or something like that. You drink half of it, then you take one of them little shot cans of V8. You know what I'm talking about, the little bitty ones, and you would
Mm-hmm.
pour that into the beer, and it would give it kind of this salty, tomatoey taste that goes really well with a good beer.
Ooh.
And then when Bud Light come out with them like as a product, now I don't know how long they've been making them, but I didn't see one until I was at least 20. Uh, but now, like now that they're on the shelves, it was like God Himself has come out of heaven to deliver manna to my tool shed.
You know what we should do, since we're not making money yet from this show? You know what? We should do some advertising for Bud Light, since you're advertising their beer. And I enjoy Stella Artois beer. It's the best beer in the world. Your lady also loves it too. And let me tell you, ooh, that is good beer. You know what? We should start collecting some banks, some dough
Oh
here.
yeah,
I mean,
I will start messaging the manufacturers of Bud Light as soon as we get off of this because
oh,
oh yeah, they owe us one for this. We're gonna get them at least $3 in beer sales out of this.
oh yeah, there you go. And we'll get like what, $1.50, $1.50 for advertising fees or something or another.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's something we should seriously explore once we reach 1,000 viewers, and I'm confident over time we will. But I think you and we should talk offline in the next couple of months into the next year about really expanding the reach of our program. One of the things we need to check out, Herschel, is when Politicon, a live Politicon event comes. And I think that's going to be a key thing where you and I should attend Politicon, pool our resources together, get our butts there. Once they have a live event, get a table, advertise our show, our book, come up with some glossy flyers about our ideological worldview. You know, nothing too long, just brief, short pamphlets. Go to a cheap printer, get all that shit printed out, business cards, pamphlets, be done, and then we can distribute it and then have a wider audience. I
You know, I
know.
really would like to get to Politicon because, I mean, yes, Politicon is good for the exposure because a lot of up and coming political pundits, that's how they got their start, was going to a Politicon, rubbing shoulders with some other people, making friends. That's all good. But honest to God with you, I just kind of would like to go to meet people because you
Me
got to
too.
think that the political world, it has so many interesting figures. I mean, yes, there's some Charlie Kirks in the world that I wouldn't piss on if they were on fire, but there's a lot of people that I genuinely would like to meet. I would like to meet, you know, both Cristobal and Cigar and Jetty. I would love to meet Kyle Kalinske. I'd like to meet Endernax. I think he'd be another really cool dude if you could, you know, like meet, just talk to him. You
Yeah,
know,
I think
because
that's one of the projects I'm going to do. I'm going to try and reach out to him by email. I sometimes comment on his page. He seems to like all the comments that I make. So that's one thing I really want to get on.
yeah. So Endernax, if you ever watch this video, just know that we're your biggest fans.
Yes.
Like
Endernax, we love you. And
yeah, I
Cigar.
got my homemade Endernax t-shirts in the closet. Don't worry about them. I love to show them to you. Just $3 a piece.
Yeah, Endernax, he's really, really good. We would love to interview you on this show, Endernax, or whatever your real name is. So, because you know you have a lot of solid positions that are both against the traditional Reaganite right, as well as strongly against communism and other forms of totalitarian socialism. You're a true comprehensive pro-lifer. You have the right balance of a regulated nationalist form of capitalism and the importance of national community and traditional family values. So we love you, Endernax. We definitely would love you on our show, and we would love to collaborate with you as well on any projects in the future that you may have or that we may have.
Well, you know, before we get off, and one thing to the viewers that haven't watched any of Endernax's content, one of the things I would say, probably the biggest reason that I was attracted to what he was doing is because the kind of, you know, G.K. Chesterton Christian democracy worldview, it's it's a really niche view nowadays. You know, you really don't see too many big political pundits. And if you're not familiar with Christian democracy, I don't consider myself an expert. I'm not going to make some thesis on what it is and what it isn't. But I will say this: what Christian democracy generally revolves around, like what the American Solidarity Party does, is it's this belief that, you know, they are traditional in the sense that they are very family valued, very, you know, traditional families. They tend to view marriage as a very key point in society. But what they also, you know, they're not opposed to social welfare programs for community building, to reinvest in ways that help strengthen what they consider to be family values. Like, and I think that we have crossover with them because it's something that me and Nevin have pointed out often on the show is that it's one thing to be in favor of strong families. It's an entirely another thing to take the next step and to start investing in families. So instead of just saying that, you know, abortion is a problem in the country, what we would say is, yes, abortion is a problem in the country. Here's how you solve it: by helping redo the foster care system in the United States to streamline the process, by investing more in families through tax incentives, to you know, increase some of the social welfare programs like food stamps to families. I mean, there's a number of things that you could do to stop abortion, because the biggest contributing factor of abortion in this country, statistically speaking, is lack of financial stability.
Exactly.
And if women feel, and not just women, but in this situation, if women feel that even if they have a bad start, like say they got pregnant in high school and their boyfriend dumps them and runs off somewhere else, if they know that that child has a good chance of still growing up and having a good life, that's going to take a huge number of abortions out. Now, it won't solve it because there's still a large, significant, you know, a large enough percentage of abortions that happen just because the mother didn't feel ready or something like that. But it's my contention that doing proactive steps like that is going to drastically reduce the amount of abortions in the United States, and do far more good than any Republican anti-abortion law ever has.
Well, yeah, you know, abortion, like crime, like drug abuse, those social ills result from deep societal and structural problems. Now, in my book, Turning the Page, my recent book series, I address the issue of abortion. And let's make it very clear on this show. Both Herschel and I detest abortion tremendously. However, where we differ from the conventional right-wing opponents of abortion, like Ben Shapiro, for example, or Ted Cruz, is we repudiate neoliberal market fundamentalist economics, which does not care about the tradition, the integrity of the traditional family. And it does not care for the integrity of the national community and increasing the birth rate, because that economic ideology or worldview is rooted in hyper-individualism, in a very atomistic worldview that eschews, and which eschews any sense of collectivist notions or notions of community and collective identity. Now, what I would do, now, Herschel, you brought up some good suggestions on how to reduce the abortion rate. Let's take it further. Studies have shown that the accessibility of birth control, whether condoms or birth control pills, for example, that when that is made easily accessible, that has, according to studies, reduced the abortion rate tremendously. Secondly, what I would also do is give strong incentives for people to start families, like for a limited period, paid family leave through the federal government in cooperation with the private sector. And that's where strong unions can play a role in negotiating in good faith with employers to provide as a benefit paid parental leave or paid family leave, as long as the employers can afford it, because businesses are not always like these ATM machines that can give money out. That's why unions need to negotiate in good faith with employers who are also acting in good faith. Um, and I would take a look at also other things like ending right to work, because there have been studies, even some essays by conservative writers, Will Herberg and National Review from the 70s, which talked about how unions have actually buttressed the families, because the father, back not that long ago, a father can work a job full time and be the single breadwinner, while the mother, if she wanted to choose to stay home and maintain the household to raise the kids, she was able to do that on her own choice. Why? Because the combination of capitalism, which when properly regulated is a very progressive force, but balanced by strong union power, which ensures that the workers get a just slice, a just slice of the pie of the profits in a corporation or a business. So this is extra steps that I would implement in a radical civic nationalist government to stem the abortion rate. And then eventually we can get to address outlawing abortion through public policy, through public laws. But first, we have to give true incentives for people to have children. One of the problems, and it's been in the news, just use your Google search engine, is falling birth rates. People in the Western world, falling sperm counts and things of that nature. We got to look at that, and we got to revitalize and revamp the birth rate too as well. And there are various ways to incentivize an increased birth rate. And part of that is also encouraging healthy living styles. And we got to take a look at this crap processed food that has become the mainstay of the American diet. And that's where we're going to have to also address the issues of the role of the corporation, what they should do and what they should not do. I mean, some of that food that's out there, fast food, processed foods, and frozen foods, I mean, not trying to criticize people that eat it, but it's loaded with a lot of crap that's not conducive to good health, So we got to take a look at that too as well. I mean, this is why I call myself a radical civic nationalist, because although I am not a socialist or a Marxist, we need a radical shift away from Reaganite, Tea Party, hyper-individualist ideology that says corporations can do whatever the hell they want without any consequences. And we're all for economic freedom and free enterprise in the show. But we also realize the corrosive effects of Reagan-style, unadulterated, untrammeled, neoliberal market fundamentalism. So I've said my piece on the whole abortion issue. Any further comments, Herschel, before we move on to the next subject?
I think the only part that I really want to hit on, because you did say your point well, is when we're talking about the poor diets of most Americans, one of the things that needs to be remembered in this conversation is the fact that most people cannot afford to not have a poor diet.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I do not want to live in a world where the U.S., the federal government is the sole rationer of all nutrition. That's by that point, you have entered into a true dystopia. But
yes,
most people working their 9-to-5s. It's like last week. I lived on 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches a day. That's what I ate all day because that's what I had. I mean, it's either do that or eat at some fast food joint on the way home. And most people, yes, you could pack your lunches, and there's a lot of people I know that are packing lunches more often now to save money. But a lot of people, you only get 30 minutes for lunch. So you got to haul your ass down to a restaurant, a fast food joint, as fast as you can, buy something, and haul your ass back to work within 30 minutes. Well, you're not going to, I'm probably going to go to a Subway for that. You're almost certainly going to go to a McDonald's, a Burger King, a KFC, or one of them very unhealthy places. And I know because I do it all the time to get some food. I mean, look, this is one of the things that I tell people. is that we are trying to say that we live in the practical reality of what is around us, or that's what we try to focus on, is the practical reality of around us. Look, it would be wonderful if everybody could eat these wonderful, nutritional, low fat, low calorie diets that, mostly plants and other shit. That would be awesome if we could all afford to eat that and we all had the time. But the reality of the situation just isn't that.
Yes.
Most people, especially like if you have a large family. I remember when I was unemployed last summer, I believe I got $350 a month in food stamps to feed my wife and 4 kids. Now you can do it. We do it all, been doing it the whole time. But $350 doesn't go a long way. You're not buying lots of veggies like that. You're buying, your necessities. You're buying lots of pasta, lots of meat, like cheaper meats, beans, shit like that. But when I got my job, I started out at $11.15 an hour. I went from $350 a month to $120 a month, which I did not make up that gap in income. Like I was actually poorer at that point for getting a job than I would have been being unemployed. And that's the kind of structural shit that we talk about when we're talking about why people aren't having kids, why people are not setting up families, why people are not getting married. It's because it's fucking expensive to be married. It's expensive to have a family. And most people in the world that we live in the economy that we live in, especially young people that don't have the advantage of age and experience to get better jobs, are waiting until their 30s to have kids. And then, by your 30s, you're probably only going to have 1 or 2 kids. And that's at most. I think was the average kid right now in the United States, average number of kids like 2.1 something, I think. I'd have to look at the actual data on that, but it's low. It's way lower than it needs to be to replace the working class that we're about to lose with the baby boomers. And the Republicans won't talk about this. They'll talk about it because, lazy, neck-bearded 20-somethings that don't, sit on their mom's couch all day. And the Democrats just don't care about birth rates. They never talk about it. They never talk about any of it. So really, you only have a handful of people around the internet like us that are even talking about this issue. And it is such an important issue. And dare I say, probably the third most important issue in our country today after climate change and just a shitty economy.
Exactly. No, I think you hit the nail on the head so much. Regarding the food issues, what I would do through a new FDA, I would also carefully review what major food companies can put and not put in their foods for the sake of the public health of the Americans. The other problem with nutrition is in a lot of areas of the country, let's take inner city areas, for example, there are real food deserts where really fresh foods are not necessarily available. You have to go to the corner store, for example, like these quick marts and whatnot, to get your food. And all you have also is fast food. So a lot of it's structural. And let me make it clear, I'm not trying to talk down to the average people who are getting, fast food. These are people who don't have the time. They have families. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. They don't necessarily have the time necessarily to cook and whatnot. And what we have to do is, again, we have to go back to the structural roots of the system and re-implement policies that truly worked before Reagan, where a single breadwinner can earn the money and then the woman can simply raise the kids, cook the meals, prepare lunch for the husband, and you have a more balanced system as a result. To me, the party of family values, the so-called party of family values, supposedly the Republican Party, they'd win elections if they moved away from this Tea Party Reaganite economic ideology that's soulless, rootless, awful, terrible ideology of economics and move towards something much more wholesome. You will find that once we have this pre-Reagan form of what I term balanced and nationalist capitalism, a lot of the problems are going to solve themselves for the most part. You're not going to get a utopia. We don't advocate for utopias on this show, but things are going to be a hell of a lot better. So I just wanted to make that clear. I'm not calling for the government to ration food or dictate what you can eat and not eat to a micromanaging level, but there has to be accountability by a number of food companies and chain restaurants and what they put in their food, necessarily. All these preservatives and stuff like that. That's how you're going to get a healthier population too as well. Again, one of the things we differ from the majority of so-called conservatives is we do not like to pick on powerless people. People like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder and others, they all like to blame the average individual. They like to pile on them. What Herschel and I like to do on this show is we like to point our fingers and go after, and using state power when appropriate, to go after the powerful people who really are in charge of this country. That's the focus of our program here. So I wanted to kind of close on that note, this topic. And I think, go ahead. Do you have any closing comments?
Well, I would say to segue into what we were talking about earlier about centrism. And this is a new segment. This is what we can talk about is that what we talk about, if you go by the polls, nearly everything that we discuss is absolutely majority supported in this country. When we talk about Medicare for all, when we talk about stronger workers' rights, when we talk about a more nationally focused economy, we are I hate to call myself a centrist because I've spent years dogging on them on the internet, but what we mean by centrist is what the average person believes in. We're not talking about Joe Biden, the centrist, or Nancy Pelosi, the centrist, or neoliberalism. Because neoliberalism is basically what is referred to as centrism in the common American discourse. What we're talking about is the policies that would help the average people, policies that are overwhelmingly supported by average people. When we talk about like food, fixing our food situation, people from all across the country know how hard it is to get healthy food. It's just near impossible for most people. And before somebody says, people should just scrimp and save and eat out less. Like, I'm telling you that when you work, like for me, I can speak this as a tradesman. Tradesmen eat a lot because we work a lot. Our bodies need something to fuel it back up. And you ain't getting that shit from lettuce. You're not getting that shit from tomato
You need
sandwich.
protein. You need protein and you need carbs.
And that's the thing is that's and it's not just tradesmen. There's a lot of people, especially like line workers, that they expend a huge amount of calories every day doing shit that you would not think that would demand that much, but it does. What I'm saying is that people, you can be fat and be malnourished. And that's something that I try to tell people. Like, people are like, America's not malnourished. It has an obesity problem. Well, look, no. Malnourishment isn't just being, it isn't defined by your weight. It's what you put in your body. And people are lacking in so much because all that we eat are, we drink pop from the stores, we eat a bag of chips, we eat some gas station chicken, and we go home. And we might eat a good dinner. We might just eat some more chips because that's what we had that night. It's just these are issues that the average person are crying out for somebody to do something about it. But there's nobody in Washington that's going to do it because they live on this castle up on top of a hill, and they don't give a shit what the peasants think about. They don't care what Joe Blow, the lineman, what he's worried about, because that person doesn't matter to them, because some rich suitor from Wall Street or some oil baron or some trucking conglomerate CEO will come to them and write them a fat check to get reelected. These people are not centrist, even though they try to claim themselves to be. There's nothing centrist about letting the eviction moratorium expire while not solving the problem in the first place. There was nothing centrist about bailing out Wall Street to the tune of billions of dollars while they left the rest of the country to starve in poverty. These are not centrist positions, no matter how many times they try to say that they are, because the majority of the country, who is the center in this equation, nobody wanted to see Goldman Sachs get bailed out after they drove our economy into the ground to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud and financial scheming and billions of dollars in bad market manipulation. these people are, I mean, they're the radicals. They're the extremists. They are the minority of people that are making important decisions that nobody else wants to make.
Well, because they comprise the oligarchy. That's the American oligarchy of allied with private sector oligarchs and the think tanks that propound their message, and the news media, the corporate-owned news media that like CNN and Fox News and even MSNBC that do not cover enough issues regarding the average struggling Americans. And that's an issue. The other issue, you're addressing what's going on in Washington, D.C. I mean, take the infrastructure bill. You have the Republicans wanting to push the border wall, and most of the Democrats are not going to vote for that. And they put that in there so they could say, well, see, the Democrats don't take the border crisis seriously. And then the Democrats will throw all kinds of things, the left wing or social democratic elements of the party will throw in provisions like the Green New Deal and other things that they know the Republicans won't vote for, because half the Republicans, like Ted Cruz, are allied with the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry. And then you have the so-called problem solvers caucus in Congress of corporate politicians, both Democrats and Republicans. They're putting an alternative infrastructure bill that calls for, the partial privatization of infrastructure assets, so-called public-private partnerships. So, that's the situation here. So it's like nobody is actually coming together and saying, what is sound policy? Everything is about either fulfilling pardon my language, the wet dreams of wealthy special interests of the plutocracy, and then the other part is also purely about party-based political partisanships, as well as at times ideologically leftist schemes too, as well, that they know that is never going to pass. So it's nobody is doing what is right and what is proven to work, not only for other nations, but even back in American history.
Well, that's one of Trump's biggest failures when he was in office, was that his plan, Trump, he ran part of his campaign on infrastructure. He was rebuilding American roads and bridges and hospitals because and he was right. American infrastructure is abysmal. It's one of the worst in the developed world. We have horrible grades on everything that basically that the government should be maintaining. Now, this is due in almost entirety to the fact that the U.S. federal government has cut budgets year after year after year for infrastructure. But Trump's big magic plan to get infrastructure passed was to not raise taxes, in fact, to lower them significantly, and then just ask the private sector to pay for it out of the generosity of their hearts. Look, these people ain't paying for a damn thing out of the generosity of their own hearts. And you mark my words on this. Every mile of road that a private company covered the cost of will be a toll road. Every bridge will have a toll.
It's happening in Florida already. Parts of I-95 from Palm Beach County all the way down to Miami-Dade, they have express lanes and local lanes. The express lanes, which accommodates faster traffic, you have to pay a toll. I mean, there are a lot of toll roads in Florida. And that's another hidden tax for average Americans and even average Floridians, as well as average business owners. I mean, there was one time where much of America's interstate highway system was built with federal funds, when we had a tax rate that was frankly more rational, where you had the super wealthy, I mean, I hate to use the cliche, paying their fair share. And on taxes, just for the record, I'm not ideological. My view on taxes is they should be as high as needed and as low as possible. I'm not on the left or the right on taxes. I look at that as just a tool to achieve certain national goals. That's all I view it, pretty much. I'm not one of these people that believes because you're a billionaire, we automatically have to redistribute the wealth. I don't subscribe to that. But the fact of the matter is more often than not, the multi-billionaires and large corporations and Wall Street hedge funds and whatnot, they've had loopholes ever since the Reagan administration. In fact, the tax code, even Trump's latest tax cut and so-called Jobs Act of 2017, all this incentivizes more often than not financial speculation. And I look at the tax code as more of a tools of not redistribution, but revenue enhancement, as well as incentivizing and disincentivizing certain economic behaviors. So, that's my take again on taxes. But yeah, Trump was a colossal disappointment. What happened is that Conservative Incorporated, the Tea Party forces, they basically pushed Trump for the most part away from actual populism and civic nationalism. I mean, he brought in people like Kevin Hassett of AEI, Stephen Moore, formerly of the Club for Growth, Art Laffer, and Larry Kudlow is the chairman of the National Economic Council, the NEC. I mean, these are people that are former Bush-Reagan Republicans. These are Republican establishment, trickle-downers, globalists, many of whom were very favorable to trade with China and other enemy communist and KGB type tyrannies. I mean, this is what happens when you make the mistake of aligning yourself and making your bed in a major political party, which has a lot of entrenched interests that don't give a shit about the country's future and the country's existence. And this is where Trump made a colossal mistake. He could have been the next FDR or Teddy Roosevelt or George Washington. And Mr. Trump, you fucked up. And look, there's about 25 to 50% of the things I agree with Trump's administration, that you and I on the show agree with Trump on. But other things, Trump really fucked up. And a lot of it had to do with he surrendered too much power and influence to ALEC and the Koch brothers and the Heritage Foundation, Club for Growth, that whole Conservative Incorporated cesspool.
I mean, for God's sake, Steve Mnuchin was his Treasury Secretary. I mean, if there was ever a bigger red flag to just how embedded the Trump White House was with the remnants of, well, I'd say the remnants of, I mean, they were alive and well, but Wall Street. Steve Mnuchin was a Goldman Sachs executive with his hands on the wheel of the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. The dude should have been in prison, but Trump gave him a cabinet position.
Yeah.
When I found out Steve Mnuchin's history, that's really when I started to lose faith that Trump is a populist, because there's nothing populist about handing the keys to somebody not solely responsible, but in large part responsible for the absolute disaster that was 2008. That's not populism. Populism is not giving the wealthiest people who have failed upwards a very powerful position. Because Steve Mnuchin was one of the people that was helping negotiate the new tax bills. He was one of the people helping negotiate in the pandemic for various benefits. I mean, Steve Mnuchin, the office of the Treasury is a very powerful position that has, I would argue, some of the most direct impacts on the average people. It's an office that needs to be commanded by somebody that understands the needs of business and working class people, not just the wealthiest amongst us. And that's the problem, is that Trump abandoned any legitimacy that he had with populism. And you see it in his messaging, the difference between 2016 and 2020, because in 2016, Trump was all about rebuilding the American infrastructure, getting us out of the Middle East, renegotiating trade deals.
Draining the swamp of Wall Street, new Glass-Steagall Act, getting rid of the carried interest loophole that Wall Street has taken advantage of for quite a long time. Higher taxation on the super wealthy. And at the same time, he held the line being against socialism and communism. He was giving hints, very crude hints, at a more reformed capitalism. And that's why I publicly supported Trump at the time. In 2020, he was, for the most part, running as a conventional Republican, almost a creature of Conservative Incorporated talk radio. And when we talk about centrists, Joe Biden is not a centrist. Joe Biden is a self-serving politician. The guy collaborates with both the forces of corporate America as well as various communist and left-wing groups and powers. I mean, let's talk about Joe Biden a little bit. for example. I mean, yeah, he's done a few good things here and there, but he really hasn't been the transformative president we needed. I mean, he said, for example, to groups of wealthy corporate Democrat donors from Wall Street, he said nothing's going to fundamentally change in this country. He has said he has voted for a variety of deregulation bills, like getting rid of Glass-Steagall, the 2005 bankruptcy bill that was stacked against average people. He was for NAFTA. He was for permanent normal trade relations with communist China and Putin's Russia when he was vice president under Barack Hussein Obama. Joe Biden has voted against defense initiatives of Ronald Reagan during the 1980s when we were fighting the open Cold War. He's for the New START Treaty and reinstating America in the INF Treaty, which the Russians, starting under Gorbachev through Putin, was violating left and right. Joe Biden, the opportunist, took money from Council for a Livable World, which is a left-wing peacenik disarmament group that wanted to disarm America's nuclear weapons programs and military forces. And then he even collaborated with the Soviet Union, according to a Politburo document of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from 1979 that was leaked out by the dissident Vladimir Bukovsky, which talks about how Joe Biden said, we're just going to pretend to do something and care about the dissidents, but we're really not going to do anything. And he said this with Soviet leaders. I mean, the guy is a total screwball slimeball. I mean, this is not a centrist. The guy was called the senator from MBNE or Senator Credit Card because he's from Delaware and what is headquartered in Wilmington, Delaware. There's credit card companies and banks and big credit banks. Come on, the guy is an opportunist. He's not a centrist. Neoliberalism is not centrism. Back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even into the 70s, that was considered crackpot economic theory, just as crackpot is fascist or socialist or communist theories. Centrism, as we understand it, as what used to be understood, any sane student of political science, centrism means neither laissez-faire, Tea Party, Reagan, globalist, trickle-down capitalism, and it doesn't mean socialism or communism or fascism or neo-Nazism on the other end of command economies. This is a middle road. It's like what the German Social Democrats during their most right-wing phase in the Gerdsburg program of 1959 says as much planning is needed and as much free market as desired, or as much free market as possible, and as much economic planning needed. And that is centrism. Tea Party ideology, deregulation, free trade, that is not centrism according to the viewpoints of the average American voter and non-voter.
Well, it's like this. You go around.
I'm tired of this term centrism being constantly mislabeled.
Yeah. Well, it's like this, Nevin. If me and you walked around America and we took a poll of people and we asked them, are you in favor of NAFTA? Are you in favor of permanent normal trade relations with China? Are you in favor of Warren Buffett paying a smaller effective tax rate than his secretary? Are you in favor of Wall Street being able to use loopholes to basically print money? Most people would say no. If you ask people, do you want to be in the Middle East? Do you want our government to just be wholly and totally incompetent, that to the point that they would take a vacation with the eviction moratorium expiring without taking a single vote on the issue? Most people they would be so pissed off, because average people, they want a better life for them and their kids. They want to make enough money to survive, and they want to they want to retire when they're young. They don't want to worry about, do I have to work or do I have to, it's like this, it's terrible. And this makes me shudder every time I think about it. But like the number of cancer patients that have to make the decision, do I quit working to do my cancer treatments, or do I, stay working and then run the risk of dying of cancer? Or, diabetes patients that have to change, make the decision between paying for their diabetes medicine or paying their house payment or their food payment. You know, or paying for food. These people are centrist. They're in the middle of the political spectrum. Like you said, they're not Reaganites. They're not commies. These people don't give a shit about, you know, John Maynard Keynes, Karl Marx, or Friedrich Hayek. Or Hayek. I can't remember his first name. They don't give a shit about any of them. They just want a better life for themselves. And these people like Nancy Pelosi, these people like Chuck Schumer, these people like Joe Biden, like Kamala Harris, these people are neoliberals to the core. The only purpose of their ideology is to make their friends and themselves infinitely more wealthy at the expense of every other thing in this country that matters. They're the kind of people that would approve a 10% tax cut in this country, even if it meant that nobody would get health care. They're the kind of people that would give another $100 billion to fucking Goldman Sachs instead of giving us a public university. These people are not centrist. They don't give a shit what the average person thinks. The only thing they care about is making sure that them and their friends stay in power and have their pockets lined. And that is not centrism.
Yeah, that's basically betrayal of the American people and the nation. It's only centrism because it's really what has been termed the Washington Consensus, which is globalism, free market fundamentalism, open borders, and trickle-down economics, maybe with, slight variations. Most of the Republicans, with a few exceptions, they'll want more deregulation and more union busting, where the Democrats, where they pay lip service to causes that you and I identify to better the working people, but in reality they don't. Kristen Sinema, she has been against, the higher spending on the infrastructure bill, and I think against the rental moratoriums and minimum wage increase. She has aligned herself with the hardcore Tea Partiers, Reaganites in the Republican Party. That's not centrism. Joe Manchin, another case in point two as well. These people are not centrists. These are Republican lights or Reaganite lights. And they're doing it either for ideological attachments or because of the campaign donations they get, or because they don't want to be called leftists or socialists, so they want to, quote, move to the right. And it's really isn't even right-wing thought. It's certainly not conservatism. Trickle-down economics is not conservatism. When you look at a lot of the intellectual proponents of trickle-down economics, in reality, these people don't care about things like nation and community. They themselves say it. I document in my books. We've documented on this program. These people, the only thing they want to conserve is the power and extreme wealth of private sector oligarchs. And people like you and me are saying, look, more and more people out there are becoming communists and socialists and even joining some neo-Nazi groups. And a lot of it is because they're disenchanted with the system. And let me tell you, Mr. and Mrs. Private Sector Oligarch, you're better off under our system. We're going to save your asses because let me tell you, the neo-Nazis and the socialists and the communists, they're going to cut your darn heads off in a freaking guillotine. So take your pick. Choose us or choose to die.
Well, thanks to our good friend of the show, Bob Gardner, I've been doing a lot of research into Huey Long-Haired lately. And one of the things about Huey that, aside from the character itself, I've been kind of starting to try to understand the mentality of the people that followed this man. These people were desperate. These are poor-ass Louisianan farmers and agriculture-associated workers, from these small towns all across the parishes of Louisiana that they didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out. And here you got this guy, this charismatic, larger than life Louisianan Southerner that comes around and tells these people that, look, the reason that you are poor is because of them sumbitches down in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. That's the reason you're poor. And if you don't think that there's people like that today that are actively out there in the streets that are pointing their finger at Washington and the Hamptons and all of these other enclaves of the ultra wealthy across this country and saying that them are the motherfuckers right there, they're the reason that your job got shipped over to China, come join my radical organization and let's go burn their houses down. These people, this country is falling apart because the only people that are saying anything remotely true are the extremists at the fringe of the spectrum right now. Or at least that's how people are perceiving it. Because these people, like Eric Stryker, like people like Caleb Mouthen, they are deeply, deeply ideological. They are very much pushing a certain agenda that they believe very strongly in. And what they're going to do is that they're going to get all of these angry, disenfranchised, disenchanted people that feel like they ain't got a damn thing left in this life to hold on to, and they're going to point them in the one direction. They're going to give them a bunch of torches and some ropes. And you're going to see this country burn itself to the ground because people like Nancy Pelosi could not skip a fucking vacation to do anything that mattered. And don't think for 1 second that little stunt that she just pulled isn't going to be a propaganda piece for the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. Because, like Kristen Sinema doing her big thumbs down vote in the House, or Joe Manchin just basically doing nothing. Every bit of this is ammunition for a radical sect in this country to try to seize power. And make no mistake, they're going to try to seize power. We are witnessing the destruction of the American democracy right before our eyes, and our elected representatives could not give one fuck about actually trying to do anything to fix it.
Exactly. And the thing, God forbid, if Eric Stryker or Caleb Maupin seizes power, those type of people, I mean, you're going to have concentration camps. They're going to go in the Hamptons, and they're going to take those houses, and they're going to live in the lap of luxury, and then we're going to become fucking China, Russia, or Cuba, or Venezuela, or Iran. So we're going to have a revolutionary despotism that's even more rotten than the plutocracy in power. Why? Because our leadership class lacks leadership skills. They lack morality. They lack discipline. They lack fealty to the national interest. They lack a sense of fealty to the public interest. I mean, it's just absolutely contemptible. And here are people like you and I and Endernax and Cigar and Jetty and Crystal Ball and other independent thinkers on the internet and on TV that are trying to push back against it. We're saying no, hell no to the extreme left and other collectivist totalitarians, but we're also saying hell no to the plutocrats of the oligarchic so-called right. And that includes Nancy Pelosi. Her running off for vacation. What the hell did Joe Biden do? I'll tell you what Teddy Roosevelt would have done. Or how about FDR? They would have done, if you guys have ever seen the movie Son of a Woman with Al Pacino, great movie, at the end, when Al Pacino said, I'm going to take a flamethrower to this place. That's what Roosevelt would have said. And he did say that. And I have a lot of critiques of FDR on other issues. But he would have taken a freaking flamethrower and said, bitch, you're going to be helping the American people, Congress. You're going to be getting shit together. Because this country is at the brink of a fascist or communist revolution.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt would have done the same thing. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. These were leaders. However flawed they would have been. These were true national heroes that got shit done.
Yeah.
What do we have now? We have a total incompetent government. We got Russia and China and the anti-American axis of remaining communist and Islamic nations plotting against us. You have radical socialist movements in the United States. And then you got these Tea Partiers in alliance with corporate Democrats that are just preaching to average hardworking folk. Well, you just got to work harder and you got to work 5 jobs and accept lower pay and longer hours. Well, no, you don't do that. The way to, the Republicans like to bitch incessantly about the left. Fine, we bitch about the left all the time on the show. But the way to battle the left in this country is you outflank them. You steal their thunder without giving up on things like capitalism and political freedom. But you got to have revolutionary reforms. This is what Bismarck did. That's how he defeated the socialists in Germany. That's what FDR did with the new aspects of the New Deal that were good. This is what Teddy Roosevelt tried to do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's like this. People forget about Eugene Debs. Now, look, I don't love Eugene Debs. I don't hate him, but he was a very radical international socialist. But he was one of the most popular third-party candidates in U.S. political history. Like, I believe it's him and Ross Perot, and there's one other guy that are tied for total percentage of the vote, or near enough tied, for a third-party candidate. What I'm saying is that election with Teddy Roosevelt, people don't understand how divided the country was back then. It took a charismatic American first leader like Teddy Roosevelt to demand better from the current state that it was in. And this is the thing, and this is why I hate the left, is because I know a lot of leftists that are good people, but they are so fatalistic about the future of American politics. They say, oh, it's just the corporations run everything and there's nothing that we can do and we just need to sit around and wait until we pull the guns out and start shooting people. It's like, no. You get out in the damn street and you fight every single day for what you believe in, because sitting around waiting on some violent revolution is why leftists get their ass kicked over and over again in American politics. Because you've seen it where these people, good-hearted as they may be, they genuinely get this mentality in their head, and I think it's just a leftist mentality, that nothing that I do can change anything. Everything is just going to be this way forever. It's this whole post-left mentality. And it's why things don't change. Because you've got the conservatives, they're all pissed off. I mean, you've seen them. They stormed the Capitol on the 6th, ready to overthrow an election. But leftists, they've been bitching for 100 years. They're not doing anything. But you got these politicians that know this. They know that as long as they go run off and hide for a couple of weeks, people will be pissed off about them, but then they'll come back and they'll do business as usual, because this same shit happened a year ago when Mitch McConnell let the unemployment insurance expire. He went on vacation, the same August fucking vacation, letting the unemployment insurance expire. And people were pissed. People like me were all over it. And look, I'm talking to myself right now. It's me off, because we let them people do it over and over and over again to us, where they can just get away with murder because people are just too damn busy and too damn tired to care, I guess is what it is.
Well, the left is biding its time because they realize that late stage capitalism in its current incarnation in the United States is self-destructing, and they're just biding their time. Portions of them are collaborating with enemy powers, including Russia and China, waiting for the United States to collapse. Essentially, you have Democratic Socialist America, which is becoming more and more of a Stalinist organization. They're growing in membership. Communist Party USA has grown in membership. You have Caleb Maupin. He's gaining more followers with his group called the Center for Political Innovation. I mean, and a lot of younger people are embracing socialism and communism, and we don't think that's a good thing. One of the things that really always pissed me off about the left is they have this view, they have this, quote, anti-imperialist view of American policy. And what that translates to is that, well, everything in Cuba that's going on, well, it's because of the American embargo. Well, they neglect to mention, because they're not honest observers, in my opinion, they neglect to mention that the United States trades with Cuba. We've been exporting food to Cuba since the year 2000 for cash payments, granted. And half of that food is channeled to Alum Import, which is a state-owned corporation in Cuba that distributes that food then to tourist hotels, tourist restaurants, and special shops. They're all used to raise hard currency from visiting tourists from the West, including the United States. You have, for decades, since the late 70s, you had Cuban Americans were allowed to send remittances to their family. And of course, the communists is a bunch of exploitative, demonic, greedy, opportunistic parties that they are in Cuba, well, what they do is they take a large portion of the money, they invest it in military-owned banks like Gaviota and other enterprises in Cuba, and that underwrites the regime. They take advantage of human suffering and the need for families to help their families in Cuba. They take advantage of it, and Cuba, ever since the revolution in January 1959, I mean, you have Canada, West Germany, Italy, the Soviet Union, Soviet bloc, now Russian Federation, Communist China, Spain. I mean, these are huge trade partners with Cuba. I mean, they're not generally blocked from trading with Cuba. I mean, for God's sakes, you have Spanish companies and Canadian companies investing in Cuba's tourist and mining industries, for God's sakes. I mean, this embargo saying that, this is what the left, even leftists that I like Kyle Kulinski, who are not communists and when believe in capitalism, they repeat this nonsense. And they say the same thing about China. They say the same thing about Russia under Putin and all the rest of it. And this is what always pisses me off about the left, is they go against the national security of the United States. They are willfully blind because of anti-Americanism and so-called anti-imperialism, that they willfully overlook and justify the aggressive militarism of all these countries, from Iran to Venezuela to Russia under Putin, China under the Communist Party, and all the rest of it. And since we're segueing onto our last topic, now Cuba has been in the news. And for those of you who don't know, my girlfriend, Yolanda Delgado, the love of my life, she is originally from Cuba. And, she is, of course, very active on our Twitter page on politics, particularly the issues of communism in Cuba. And I wanted to get your opinion, Herschel, on what's going on in Cuba. I guess I'll dedicate this segment to the love of my life, Yolanda Delgado. Herschel, how would you describe my feelings for Yolanda? If you had to give a few words.
I will tell the audience that right here that Nevin is definitely head over heels on this woman. But as far as Cuba goes, the situation they're in, it has been my long-standing political point from way back in my Republican days, transferred to my Libertarian days, transferred to now, that the United States should not directly get involved in any shit in Cuba. And not just Cuba. This also goes on for a lot of other ones. But the reason is, this is not because I love the state of Cuba. This is not because I support the communist dictatorship there. It is simply the fact that the United States has had a pretty bad track record over the last 40 years of actually fixing the problems that it set out to solve. That being said, what's going on in Cuba right now, it's a mess. It is what it is. It's 60 years of pent-up anger from a segment of the population. Well, actually more like 70 years. 70 years of pent-up anger at a segment of the population that does not want to be run by communist dictators. Now, look, I'm not going to buy into the war hawks. I'm not going to call for a U.S. invasion of the Cuba because, again, I just imagine that would end up in an international clusterfuck. But Cuba, if the people in Cuba decide that they don't want to be run by communists anymore, that is on them. And if I was the United States, it would be my, I guess, JFK moment to tell China and Russia and Iran and other allies of Cuba that you're not going to send military intervention into Cuba to quell a rebellion. You're not going to use your influence to help suppress a voluntary action of the people. That would be my red line. If I was in Joe Biden's shoes, that's where my stance would be.
Well, I mean, from my position, it's a difficult situation. A dispassionate observer can see both sides. Where I see Cuba, like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, possibly Brazil, as issues with extreme left or communist parties in power or poised to seize power. Once again, the problem is you have the Monroe Doctrine. In the case of Cuba, you have Chinese naval vessels in the port of Cienfuegos, which was where Soviet nuclear submarines were stationed at one time. And now there are reports of Chinese naval vessels, including submarines, supposedly visiting bases in Cienfuegos. You have Russian naval vessels making port of call visits. In recent years, you have the Russian military cooperation that's always been in existence with Cuba, even abbreviated forms since the quote fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. You have Cuba supporting international terrorism, including helping to bankroll the Taliban and Al Qaeda, as well as the FARC in Colombia, and the ETA of Spain, and various black terrorists continuing to have refuge from the United States, like Joanne Chesimard. You have even under Yeltsin and, of course, Putin, not only do you have Russian-Cuban military cooperation, but you have cooperation between the Cuban intelligence and the Russian intelligence, the SVR. You have a list of examples. You have the Chinese military advisors and Vietnamese military advisors training the Cuban special forces, which have been heavily involved in suppressing the pro-freedom uprisings in Cuba, which is clearly about libertad. It has nothing to do with necessarily we want vaccines or we want more foods. They want freedom and whatnot. What should we do in Cuba? If I were to consider military planning against Cuba in the name of the Monroe Doctrine, I would clearly stake out how American forces would fare. I would collect intelligence on Cuba's biological weapons capabilities. They do have a biological and chemical weapons capability. That's been documented by Russian military defectors like Kanatyan Alabakov and scholars like Dr. Joseph D. Douglas Jr. and others. So I would take a look at that because I would have to assess American casualties and also potential international intervention. But, the sad thing is that LBJ and JFK and Eisenhower had an opportunity to overthrow Castro. There was something called the Escambray Rebellion, which started in the late 1959, many by former peasants. You had labor strikes in Cuba under Castro, and that wasn't suppressed until by the late 1960s with Soviet military intervention. Look it up, Escambray Rebellion. Amazing. And the United States CIA give piss poor support. While the Cubans had modern Czechoslovakian and Soviet-made weapons, we were giving World War II cast-offs like M1 Garand rifles and grease guns, which isn't exactly modern technology in the 1960s. What I would like to do, number one, I would tighten sanctions on Cuba, particularly any of the enterprises connected to Cuba's government sector. Number two, I would launch a massive crackdown against Cuba's subversive apparatus in the United States to considering downsizing, if not expelling, the Cuban embassy from Washington, D.C. Three, what I would do is I would launch an international propaganda campaign against Cuba and all of its allies worldwide. Four, what I would do is I would also use the CIA through the American Embassy in Cuba, put our best CIA agents there, which hopefully we have at this point, to funnel money and weapons to fomenting a new Escambray Rebellion. I think we need to get guns to the pro-Cuban people. I mean, Cuba and their allies have constantly intervened in America's political scene. I mean, they've supported American terrorists, and they still give shelter to Black Panther terrorists and other terrorists associated with the old Republic of New Africa group and other American terrorist groups. I mean, they've intervened in our affairs because they want to spread revolution. First under the tutelage of the Soviet Union, now they're in league with Xi Jinping's China and Putin's Russia. This is what the leftists, they don't talk about how Cuba has intervened in our affairs as an auxiliary to the Russia-China axis. So it's like, yeah, we need to take a very hard line position towards Cuba because it's not even because we don't even, I don't like the government. I despise the government. And there are crimes against humanity, but there is something called the Monroe Doctrine. And that is not something that we've enforced since really the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis and the Kennedy-Khrushchev Agreement, which still allowed Castro to remain in power for all these decades. I mean, because you have Russia and China, you have Cuba aligned formally with Saddam's Iraq, with Nicaragua under the Sandinistas, Venezuela under the Chavistas, continuing to fund protests and riots against neoliberal globalism in Chile and other countries. They're fomenting unrest. They still are politically subverting the United States through the political left in this country. They're cooperating with the Iranians. They're cooperating with the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans and military cooperation, Vietnamese. I mean, the list is endless. So this is a violation. We have to look out for the Monroe Doctrine. So I think if we were to ever militarily intervene, we have to study it very, very carefully, because Herschel, you're right about one thing. Our military adventurism has either been so half-assed that it bites us in the back, and two, when we tried to help Cuban freedom fighters back from late 1959 until well into the 1960s, we did a half-assed. Either we do it to win by utilizing and allying ourselves with authentic Cuban revolutionaries, or we don't do anything at all. My choice, if I were president, I would help authentic Cuban revolutionaries that are true nationalists, that are true patriots, to get internet to Cuba, to allow people to reach out and communicate with continue to communicate with their families. And I would have the CIA launch an open campaign against the Cuban Communist Party, essentially, including airdropping weapons through spy planes or high-flying spy planes or transport planes out of range of Cuban surface air missiles and anti-aircraft. I would get my generals and CIA people involved with this. I think we need to do that in Nicaragua. We got to do that in Venezuela. And we also got to really mop up the Cubas in collaboration with Russia and China, Iran, and Venezuela, their subversive apparatus in the United States. On this show, at least with me, and I think you, Herschel, we take an uncompromising position against communism and other forms of totalitarianism. And if we have a post-communist government, we also have to not encourage extreme neoliberalism either and globalism in Cuba. It has to be a truly nationalist, pro-freedom government in Cuba. Not that one that's going to prostitute itself to American multinationals, most of whom were aligned with the Castro dictatorship, and obviously a government that's going to pretty much dismantle the communist apparatus of terror, control, and starvation in Cuba. So that's my position on that. I'm a little hesitant about direct military intervention until we know we can actually win and have as few casualties as possible. Because one of the things Cuba does have is a relatively good armed forces. Their special forces are some of the best in the world. The Cuban Intelligence Service, now known as the Directorate of Intelligence, or DI, is very effective. It's one of the best intelligence services in the world. So I think we have to study it really, really carefully. But in the interim, we got to give weapons and money and means of communication to the Cuban people and true Cuban freedom fighters.
Well, Nevin, I think that this has been a really good episode, and I've been glad to get back in the saddle. We plan on doing another show next weekend, or are we going to hold off the week after?
Yeah, let's do it possibly Sunday. I got a fun next couple of days, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, with your lady and her kids, and maybe even Emily potentially. So, but I think during the day, maybe Sunday morning, we can do something, or we could do a show from Vermont even too as well. I may bring up my computer and we can work out a show where we can do a show where I'm broadcasting from St. Johnsbury, Vermont. I think that might be exciting. So we'll talk about that. Now, guys, stay tuned. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, Renowned geopolitical expert J.R. Nyquist and I are going to be talking about the geopolitical threats facing America. So we're going to catch up with some current events. So we're going to be pre-recording that program 12 p.m. tomorrow. Herschel, it's been a great show. Glad we're back in the saddle. It feels great. And this wine was a great addition to the show. In fact, I'm going to help myself to another glass after we're done.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you for joining us for this program. Make sure you spread the word about this show as well as the Patriotic Populist Facebook page. Be sure to comment, keep them respectful. Herschel, thank you for a great show. You're always a great co-host of mine. God bless America. God bless you, Herschel. And I just want to thank God for a good friend like Herschel, the love of my life, Lady Delgado, and my family and my other friends. I'm very, very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to God and my health for getting through COVID. And I just wish everybody stays safe, stay healthy, and just keep on fighting the good fight. Thank you and have a great night.